Hello and welcome to another demo of WebWatchBot. I'm going to go through the transaction recorder feature of our product and also show you a number of the other features that are associated with transactions. To get started, you click on the drop down for the New button on the toolbar and then click Record a Transaction. This will open a secondary window that I'm resizing to fit within this video, where you can then type in a URL, copy and paste one, or select from the drop down if you've already entered in a URL. Once you've entered the URL, you click on the button Go, and you can see that it creates a list of the pages that are being visited. So this is what I've already put in. This was copy and pasted, and then I clicked the Go button and it filled that in, and it also loaded the rendering of the page below. As you can see here, it's a simple form, username and password, and I'm just going to put in username and password. And when I click submit, you'll want to watch this list up here because it's going to grow. So I submitted that form, and on this page it shows that I entered the username user, the password is pass, and up on the list we have a new step. So we had step 1, which was the URL that I copy and pasted. Step 2 was captured by the transaction recorder, and the URL is actually different. And there's also this post data. So post data is text that is passed from the browser to the web server, and you can see that it's in the form of name value pairs. Username equals user, ampersand, password equals pass. And then there's this ampersand submit to equals submit, and submit to just happens to be the name of the button that was clicked. There's some other information about the header that was also passed. Alright, so just to continue on, if I click on a link, you'll see that now it added yet another step. This is subpage 1. The URL is subpage1.html. There was no post data because links are GET requests. So there's two different types of submission of the round trip from your browser back to the server. There's GET method and the post method. Anytime you fill out a form, you're performing typically the post method. And anytime that you might have a URL that has what we call a query string, if you're familiar with that, that would be the GET method. So let's go ahead and just save this transaction. We do that by clicking Save and Close. And so what that does is it closes the transaction recorder window, and now we are presented with the Steps tab for the new transaction properties window. So we have the General tab, the Steps tab, the Alarm, SLA status, and Schedule. And what you'll want to take note of is on the right hand side there's a list of watch items in the order of execution. So you can see here that we have the 3 recorded steps, and they're all in the same exact order that they were recorded in. You could move them around. Sometimes that will break functionality. If there's a particular page that needs to come up before another page, you want to make sure that that order is respected. Typically, after you've done a recording of a transaction, you'll just want to leave this tab alone. If you switch to the General tab, this is where you can change the name of the transaction, how often it runs, and some other settings that are all here and explained in our wiki. The Alarm tab is where you would set up your alerts. And just to briefly mention that we also have another video where you can watch about the alarm settings and setting up the different alerts. So I won't go into detail on that. Once you're satisfied with your transaction, you can name it anything you'd like. I'm going to name mine test form, and then I'll click OK. And by default, it's just asking if I want to set up the reports. I'll go ahead and say yes, I want to set up the reports. Alright, so now the view has changed. In the Explorer, under Transactions, we have the new test form. It's already selected. The watch list shows test form up here, and also the steps that were recorded. And so we can see that There's also a new one because we only recorded 3 steps, but there's this thing called summary. And what the summary is it's kind of like a placeholder for all of your transaction steps. This is a cumulative type of a watch item, but it's special in that it doesn't actually perform anything other than coordinating these steps to run in order. So as you can see, this transaction's already run one time, and if I switch to the output tab, and we're still on the summary, you can see we have this special page here that shows each of the steps, how long it took for them to respond, and the HTTP status code, and everything was A-OK. And so since this is running every minute, it's updating, it's running on schedule, and you can see that it's already run twice. We have an average response time for all 3 steps of 306 milliseconds. So you could just have to keep in mind that the summary is a representation of all the steps. So what happens when one of these steps actually doesn't respond in a timely manner, or triggers an alarm and goes down, because all the statuses right now are up? Well, if it goes down, then if just one step goes down, then this transaction's actually going to go down as well. So one of the best practices for using transactions is to set up your alerts, email alerts specifically, for the summary. Now, it doesn't mean you can't set it up for each of the steps. It's just when you're running a transaction, you probably only want one email alert to come in and not one for each of the individual steps. So if we go back into the properties for this transaction, we're going to keep it on the summary as highlighted and click on the properties. And you can see we're back in that window we were in before. And so one of the options is continue after a step fails, and that's automatically and checked by default. You could uncheck that. So you could say, you know what, I don't care if any of the steps really fail. I want it to continue on and keep running all the steps. Or you may say come to a dead stop, and that's when you uncheck it. So if the first step in the transaction fails, it's not going to run the other steps. The downside of doing this is that when you run reports, you aren't going to have a complete set of comparable data for all the steps. So say you've run 3 times, and on the 4th time, step number 1 fails. Well, it's not going to run step 2 and 3. But step 1 will have run for 4 times. Yet 2 and 3 will have only run for 3 times. And if that happens again, if the next run, the first step, fails, then step 2 and 3 again will not run. So then step 1 will have 5 runs. Steps 2 and 3 would still only have 3 runs. So just something to keep in mind. A number of these other options don't come into play here in this demo, but they're all worth checking out because a lot of advanced web applications require certain things that are configurable here in the transaction properties. I'm just going to go ahead and click OK. And one of the most common questions that we get is, how do I know when the output has failed? You know, I'm getting an HTTP status code of 200, but when users go to the page and they go and log in, it's failing. But I'm still getting it as a status of up. Well, the reason is that the output is HTML, but the HTTP status code is not. That's a different thing. That's not necessarily going to fail if you can't log in. So what you have to do in this instance is you're going to have to search for certain keywords in the output. So for example, the login step is here, it's step 1, but the output that's generated after the login is on step 2. You can see here the credentials entered and the username and password. Click here to continue. So this is the actual page you want to check the output from. And how you would do that is you would go into the properties. I just right-clicked on that step, and then I'm going to click on properties, and that will bring up this watch item or transaction step, whatever you want to call it. and you will see that I can go into the Settings tab, and I'm going to search for specific text. So I want to see if the word credentials is in there. Now, one thing that's very important to point out is that when the search is performed, it's searched against the HTML. So even though you may have a lot of text here, there's formatting behind that. There's fonts that are being set, sizes of those fonts, the colors, and all these different things. So if I was just to type in freeform text, it probably would never find it, unless it was just one word, for example. But if I were expecting to look for Exclamationsoft home and then I put a space WebWatchBot home, it's not going to find that because there's HTML tags in between these two different lines on that page. So I'm just going to leave it as credentials. I'm going to click OK and click OK again to save it. And now I'm just going to force this to run manually. I'm going to click Run. Ran through it very quickly, and okay, let's look at the log for that. I want to see, what happened. Okay, everything's fine. It ran that. It started, ran the transaction. Everything looks great. It ran just fine. So now, what I want to do is go back in, and I'm going to change it so it's just looking for some garbage. I'm going to click OK. Click OK again. And now I'm going to force it to run again. And now it failed. So this watch item, it looked for, and you can see here in the log, that it was searching for that gobbledygook, and it failed. Page was downloaded, however the search text specified was not found. Okay. So that's good to know. Let's make it a little more realistic. Let's go back in to the properties, settings, and I'm going to put in the word error. Now I know that's not on the output, but I know that if I see the word error, I want this watch item's alarm to trigger. So I'm going to click this box. If search text is found, then trigger failure. Great. So if it sees the word error, it's going to fail. So we're going to go ahead and run this transaction again. Again, to run the transaction, you've got to highlight the summary. Oh, and it already ran before I could even click it. So now it's back up. And if we look at the output, everything is perfectly fine, ran perfect, found the search text, and it's all good. So now that I have it set up like this, if the word error ever comes up for this step, the one where the output after the form is submitted, if the word error shows up here, it's going to trigger the alarm, and then the transaction will actually go down. So this is just a quick sampling of the different types of settings that you can make with your transaction, and just a demonstration of how you can set up a very similar type of transaction to record your web forms in your web applications to test for uptime and availability using WebWatchBot. Thank you very much for watching.